why they didn't cordon it off, why they did all these different things. I really still don't know any of the answers to that. But after they did all that, they took me back up to the reception of the hotel. There was an ambulance there waiting for me. I had to get into the ambulance alone. I wasn't allowed to have anybody in the ambulance with me. Again, I travelled to Portimao Hospital in the back of an ambulance with an ambulance man who sat there. Again, no English spoken. I was just completely terrified by myself in the back of an ambulance in a foreign country. After it was just horrendous. So I got to the hospital, and my boyfriend and my actual boss of the company that I worked for were waiting at the seating area inside the door. They weren't allowed to come even inside past the reception area of the hospital. I was taken in a wheelchair down to the very basement of the hospital by two men to an examination room where there was a gynecologist and a few nurses there. Again, nobody spoke English. But they were the first people that actually showed genuine care. They were very caring, even in the broken English eventually that I got out of them. So they wanted to, and rightly so, do all the tests that they need to do, and what I now know to be an ORCID, after what happens. So they take blood, they take swabs, they do all these different things, which I, fought against. But they did, and they took notes of all the injuries that were there, and cleaned me up as best they could. And I was brought back up to the reception area of the hospital, and I had nowhere to go. There was no policeman or woman or anybody waiting there for me. There was no information given to me. I'd no family, I'd no friends. I did have friends, but they all lived in where it happened, in that block. I'd no home. That was my home. I'd no money, I'd no phone, I had no clothes. Everything was in that apartment, and I had nowhere to go. So the only choice I had was to go to the home of the boyfriend that I had the argument with the night before, and found myself in a quite an odd, I suppose, to put it mildly, situation in what became a very toxic relationship, but that's another story. So yeah, I didn't. My parents flew over. They had to fly over separately because it was high season. There was very few flights, and they got over, and I didn't have any contact from the police. I didn't have any interaction with them at all. And about 4 days later, I needed my things. Like, I needed my clothes. I need, everything. Like, so there was an agreement made, I think, with the manager of the hotel that I would go back into the room and collect my stuff. But when I got there, everything was already pre-packed. So somebody had obviously already been in the room. They had already packed my things away. My mom came with me to the room, and when we got into the room, everything was still the same. Blood is still on the floor. The bloody sheets are still in the bed. My mom was trying to, move the sheet to cover the blood, so I wouldn't have to look at it. And in doing that, my nails were in the bed. So nothing was collected. No, everything was still there. Obviously, people have been in and out and completely destroyed any evidence that potentially would have been collected. Because I know, well, for one, my mum touched the sheets and moved them to try, so I remember looking at and as my mum, the two of us have obviously had this conversation since. It was just, I knew at that moment that, nothing was going to happen here. Nobody was going to help me at all. I was given an appointment card to go to Portimao police station, the one that you see a lot of on different television stuff. That's exactly the same one that I went to. So I was given an appointment card. It was for 8 days after what had happened for me to go and give a statement. I now know, because I gave a statement 16 years later that took over 3 days. And I didn't give a statement in Portugal because I wasn't refusing one, but I wasn't asked for one. And obviously not having any knowledge of the legal system anywhere, let alone in Portugal, because I'd never had to give a statement before, being involved with the police before my whole life. Like, so I had no clue of what to expect. But I got to Portimao police station. I was never offered a translator, so I had to find somebody myself. I asked a friend of mine who spoke fluent English but was Portuguese if he would accompany me, because I had no other option. I wasn't given another option. So when you get to that police station and you walk in and you're straight upstairs, my mother wasn't allowed to enter the building, let alone wait for me. So she had to go to a coffee shop a few doors down and have a cup of coffee while I went upstairs to an open office. There was no privacy given. There was nothing. There was policemen sat over in the corner of the room. One had his feet up on the desk. They obviously knew the person that I had brought with me. Turns out they knew him very well. I didn't know that at the time. They were all backs slapping and shaking hands and, you know, friendly with each other and all speaking Portuguese. I hadn't got a clue what was going on around me. And the police officer who had been sat with his feet up on the table just like slid an evidence bag across the table to me and said, "These are your clothes." And I said, and then again, cheeky bitch that I am, I said, "Well, who fucking else had owned them? You got them from my apartment." I was really so angry because of just how insensitive the whole thing was, and um how little they thought of what had happened, because there was just, yeah, it was just laughable really. And they asked me to give a description of the person. I gave it as best I could. I explained everything, you know, there's this whole hullabaloo of, you know, this mark on his leg and, you know, whatever. Firstly, I never said that he had a tattoo on his buttocks. Buttocks wouldn't be language that I would have used then, and I don't use now. And that's not what I said. Maybe that was lost in some sort of translation, which seems to be happening a lot. But I had told the Portuguese police then, and I still say now, that I seen something. I don't know what it was, but there was a mark on this person that could have, you know, he wore tights, like what appeared to be like female women's like tights. I don't know if it was a pull in the tights. I don't know if it was a birthmark, a scar, a tattoo. I don't know what the mark was, but I know that it was there, and I'm confident in that. I've no reason. That's just what it was, and I had said that then to the Portuguese police. I described him as a German. They told me I couldn't say that, and I said, "Well, I can, because he is." And they said, "No, you can't say that because you don't know." And I said, "But I do." And there was a back and forth about that. Then they told me that I had to say that he was Germanic, which was something I had never heard of in my life. And I asked them to explain what that meant. And I was told that it was somebody from that area. So it could be German, it could be Dutch, it could, and I said, "But no, he was German. Like I'm not saying he was Germanic. I don't even know what that means." Anyway, so I was there for the length of a cup of coffee. Because my mum was just finishing up a cup of coffee in the cafeteria a few doors down, and that was it. So that was my statement, supposedly. And in the weeks that followed, I was followed by the Portuguese police. They would be in the pub if I was there. There would be places I was just to see if I was a slut. And yeah, they just intimidated me. They told me I needed to go home. That, why don't you just go home, like, you know, and that if I you know, made too much of a song and dance about this, that, you know, I would destroy tourism in the area, that my friends could potentially lose their jobs, all these different things, just continually all the time, that like I was the problem. The person who committed the crimes against me wasn't seriously an issue, obviously, for them. It was the fact that I was the issue, like, you know. I was a holiday wrap. What did I expect?
When were you able to leave Portugal?
I left. I could leave whenever I wanted because they didn't do it. Like, so, I had this conviction inside me, and I don't know why, but I had to see out my 21st birthday because my little brothers and sisters were coming over. It was one of their first holidays abroad ever. And I wasn't ruining that for them, and they didn't know what had happened. So I had to pretend, which was probably, yeah, it was one of the most difficult pretendings I've ever had to do. And I don't think I'd done it too well, if I'm being quite fair. But I tried my best to, and they had a fantastic time. I know they did, and particularly my little sister, who was only 9 at the time. Like, so yeah, I stayed obviously for that time, and I was in a relationship, and he lived there, so I kind of held on and tried my best to see out the season that I had said I would, and figure out what it was that I wanted to do. And I'd went into this very deep place inside myself mentally, that I had, the person that I was no longer existed. I tried so hard to recreate who I felt she was. And I think I convinced myself, I suppose, that I was doing a really good job at it. And if I forgot about it, and if I didn't think about it, and if it, all these ifs, then it didn't exist. Then it really didn't happen, you know? And that worked for a while. I think it was my mind's way of protecting itself, you know? Um, I found, oddly, Portugal hugely comforting for me, in a sense that, and maybe I needed the sunshine. Maybe I needed, to see out the time that I had there as a something for me. It was a win for me of all of this. And I became pregnant in the October, I think it was October, November that year, and had my son in 2005. Now I have my son here in Ireland, but I spent a little bit of time going back and forth with my son to, obviously try and see if a relationship would work with his biological father, but that didn't happen. And life kind of has a way of protecting you. Your mind has a way of protecting you that allows you to keep going forward. I think for me at that time, it was, becoming a parent and becoming a mother was truthfully the last thing that had even entered my head. But it had, the opposite effect of what people might imagine it would have. Luckily for me, it became the thing that saved my life, and again, I don't say that to be dramatic, but I took my role, I suppose, as a parent, as a mother, extremely seriously, and that just became my main focus. And obviously, look, I have 3 children. Each of them have saved me in their own way, and I'm very lucky to have them and to have that in my world. But at that time in my life, I had picked the wall that I wanted to drive into. I had had enough of the turmoil that was going on very much inside me, that I wasn't able to even voice outwardly because I couldn't put words on it. I didn't know, it's very hard to explain to people that you died, but you're physically still alive. Like, you're not here, but you're physically still here. I don't, I still struggle to put words on that, because you're dead, but you're not dead. Like, I don't know.
So let's go forward some years then, and this all blows up in the news. How did that happen in your life?
It's so funny because I do read again things that say, oh, she's just jumping off on the bandwagon of Madeleine McCann, and it's all, I didn't choose the person who did this to me. In fact, I had zero choice in anything that had happened to me in that room and since. So yeah, I just to say that, yeah, that's certainly not the avenue of that I would be going down. But obviously I knew about Madeleine's case. I don't know anyone in the world that didn't or doesn't. But I wasn't a follower as such. I say that, you know, kindly, but it wasn't something that I was hugely following the way some people do, and I understand that, but I wasn't one of them people. So in June of 2020, when it was actually the 3rd of June, it was one of my brother's birthdays, 2020, one of my brothers sent a link into our family WhatsApp group, excuse me, and it was at the height of COVID, and I was working from home and I'm extremely busy, and I seen this link and the thumbnail of it, you could see something about Madeleine McCann, something, and I said, haven't got the headspace or the time for this at the minute, I'll read it later. So yeah, it was a long day at work, and that night, it was around 10 o'clock, I actually read the article that he had sent. And in hindsight, when the two of us speak about this, he was on the other end peppering, waiting for me to read it, because he wanted to see if I reacted the way that he had when he read it, because it was essentially a call for information on this person, this description, this. And the minute I read it, you know, honestly, like one of them kind of things out of a movie, all these things just start going, you know, you're imagining numbers and all these things going around, adding things together in your head. You're like, oh my God. So I did what probably most people would do, and I googled, you know, more, because there was obviously all these different, and the Operation Grange had put out like a public call for information to people. There was a video kind of thing on one of the newspapers, or maybe more of them, but this one that I watched, and they had put a public plea out to seeking more information on this person, and had given like if contact numbers and emails and all that kind of stuff to contact them. And I toyed with it for a little bit in my head. I was like, I don't know whether, you know, I don't know whether this would be connected. I don't know whether, but I knew somewhere in me that like the right thing to do was to contact them and let them see, do you know? So I emailed the email address that night. It was probably around, again, I kind of came around to it, was about 11:30. It was late enough that night, and I heard from them the next morning. They contacted me the next morning. They were so nice, honestly, because when I knew that they firstly believed me, because you have to understand that I had come from, you know, my only ever experience with police and anything like that has been so negative and disbelieving and belittling and all them horrendous other things that came along with it. So putting myself out there again to a police force that weren't even my own, with the greatest respect, like they were a British police force. Here I am going with another foreign police people. Like, you know, it took a lot for me to send that email, if I'm being honest, even though I knew it was the right thing to do, but I did. And it was very short. I just explained who I was, that I had this experience on this date in Portugal, and the description they gave is a description that I had given at the time, and that I believe that, you know, there is potential for them to be connected and la la la. So from there, it just kind of really snowballed quite quickly. Obviously, they believed me, which I'm very grateful for. And they then put me in contact, I suppose, with the BKA in Germany, who essentially were and are investigating Christian Brueckner and the crimes that he allegedly committed. So yeah, there was an agreement made with the Gardaí here in Ireland that I would give an initial statement here, which, as I said earlier, lasted over 3 days. They were fantastic as well. Although I do know that you know, there's a lot of bureaucracy because of cross-border, you know, European wide kind of different jurisdictions. There's so much paperwork and T crossing and I dotting that I wouldn't even have a clue about, to be quite honest. But that's why the process is so long and drawn out, is that it's so multi jurisdictional that you can't, like, one force can't do anything without the okay of ... you know, behind it. And I think that's what people need to understand in all of the cases that are linked here, that it's not just one case firstly, and it's not just one jurisdiction, it's multiple ones, and they all differ in how they interpret their laws and how they enforce their laws. So that's what takes time. It's very, very frustrating. I know this more than most people, because from the 3rd of June, I didn't have my day in court until May of 2024. So I had years of waiting and back and forth and continual kind of letdowns, I suppose, for want of better words, because of procedure, of, you know, one country not agreeing to this or that, or this thing or that thing. Like it all ultimately was delayed as a result of that, which is very, very difficult. Logically, I understand it, but emotionally, like, it's debilitating. Like, it is so drawn out for any victim of a crime like that. If they are lucky enough to get their case actually heard in a court, the waiting game it just puts your life on pause again. Like, it's horrendous. And, you know, I'm saying that, and I'm so grateful to the BKA, to Operation Grange, to everybody involved in you know, getting it to that point and helping me through that. But it still doesn't change the fact that, you know, the length of time waiting and the whole build up to it, the re-traumatization of it, the having to completely relive every minute detail, is, you know, mentally very damaging for people and for me. Like, I don't mean, like, obviously, like, it's taken a huge toll on me mentally. And, you know, I think I wouldn't be, you know, wrong in saying that if people experience something as traumatic in their lives, they would like to hope that 22 nearly years later, that they will be some way moved on and living, in a sense, whereas it's done the complete opposite for me. And that's not to play a small violin or anything. I'm not looking for sympathy on that. Like, I suppose there's a part of me that is angry, because my life again has been turned upside down. Again, I have to confront all this. Again, I will potentially have to, if an appeal is granted, see this person in court again. All these agains that put my
Hazel, when you say again, are you saying that you had to go to court and you did see him in court?
I testified in trial, yeah.
Okay, could you describe that experience, what that was like, please?
Yeah, so I testified on trial in Braunschweig in Germany in May of last year, almost a year ago to date. And it was over 2 days, 2 full days in court. So yeah, I was, for the first time at that time in 20 years, I was in the same room as that person again. And it's very hard to portray it, you know, it as different to what's seen on the television, I suppose. But when you see the clips of the courtroom and all that stuff, it looks huge, but it's really not. And you'll notice it now, or for the people who are listening will notice it now, that when they do put things up of the courtroom, you'll notice that there's one small little chair and a table sat in the middle of the room.